Have you ever witnessed a moment where in just a few seconds a person reveals everything they've been trying so hard to hide? A moment that makes you stop and wonder, if that happened to me, how would I react? On a quiet morning, flight from Portland to Dallas, a white woman strode quickly to the front row, snatched the ticket right out of a black woman's hand and barked, "People like you don't belong in first class." No one said a word. No one stepped in. Just the silent stares of the passengers and the strangely calm expression of the woman who had just been insulted. But what the entire cabin didn't know was that the woman they were looking down on was the very person who built this airline with her own hands. If you've ever felt judged because of your appearance, your skin color, or where you come from, then today's story is for you. And if you believe kindness is a strength that never goes out of style, stay with me until the end. Before we begin, if you want to hear more real-life stories with depth and meaning, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you can follow along with us. Mornings at Portland International Airport always carry their own kind of light, fresh but never rushed, warm yet touched with the crisp chill drifting in from the Columbia River. The smell of freshly roasted coffee slips through every shop, the sound of suitcase wheels sliding across tile, the soft whoosh of automatic doors opening and closing. Everything blends into a steady rhythm of life that travelers have grown used to. In that gentle flow of people, Diana Carter walked at her usual unhurried pace, carrying a brown leather bag she'd kept by her side for nearly 10 years. It wasn't expensive, not at all. Just something she treasured because it was with her during the first shaky steps toward building her dream. Diana always moved like that, calm, grounded, never showy. She didn't flaunt power, didn't announce her status. She didn't need anyone to know she was the CEO of SkyVista Airlines, one of the fastest-growing carriers in the United States. Today was no exception. No security detail, no special escort, no priority lane. She chose to fly like a regular passenger. To her, it was the only way to truly authentically feel the passenger experience. As she passed the check-in counter, a young employee smiled warmly. "Have a great flight, ma'am." Diana nodded back. Simple as that. She'd always believed kindness didn't need a spotlight. When she reached the security area, Diana noticed an elderly Mexican-American woman struggling with the plastic bin for her shoes. She kept placing it in, taking it out, unsure if she might mix her belongings with someone else's. No one stopped to help. Everyone was too busy with their own flights. Diana leaned down gently. "I'll keep this here for you, ma'am. Go ahead through the scanner first." The woman let out a relieved breath and held Diana's hand. "Thank you, dear. People like you're rare these days." Diana only smiled softly. Someone else might have walked past without a second thought. But for Diana, a small gesture could save someone from a long, exhausting day. Gate B12 was more crowded than usual. Young, old, rushed, relaxed, everyone mixed together in the way airports always do. Diana chose a seat by the window where she could watch the pale gray sky slowly opening up, hinting at a clear day ahead. While waiting, she pulled out her phone to review reports from the operations team. Recently, there had been concerns about discriminatory behavior at partner-managed airports in Dallas and Denver, not caused by SkyVista itself, but affecting SkyVista's passengers. And that kept her awake on more nights than she cared to admit. SkyVista was born not just to move people from one place to another, but to remind them they deserved respect no matter who they were. She let out a quiet sigh. "I need to see it for myself." And right at that moment, the automatic doors slid open and Patricia Lowell walked in. A white woman mid-40s dressed in luxury that bordered on gaudy. Straight-ironed blonde hair, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, and a designer bag sharp and polished just like her gaze. Patricia moved quickly, as if the entire airport belonged to her. She called someone on the phone, her voice loud enough to make a few people flinch. "Yeah, I'm at the gate now. First class as usual." But the crowd here is unbelievable. She dragged out the word unbelievable with a tone dripping in irritation like the world itself was inconveniencing her. Diana simply observed, "No judgment, no irritation, just awareness." When boarding for the first group began, Diana stood and prepared to join the line. But before she could even step forward, Patricia shoved past from behind, nearly knocking an elderly man aside. "Excuse me, I'm in first class. I need to board now." The gate agent smiled politely. "We're boarding soon, ma'am. Please wait just a moment. Patricia rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. Diana watched, lips pressing together, not out of anger but familiarity. She'd seen people like this countless times. People who believed status or skin color gave them permission to treat others badly. As Diana walked down the jet bridge, she noticed a few passengers glancing her way, surprised to see her entering the first-class cabin. That look didn't sting the way it used to, but it served as a quiet reminder the world still had a long way to go. The first-class cabin glowed with warm gold lighting, wide leather seats, a soft hint of eucalyptus in the air. Diana made her way to her seat 1A, the very seat she had spent 3 months designing down to the tiniest detail. She rested her hand on the headrest, and that's when Patricia marched up, eyes blazing. "Wait, what are you doing here?" Diana tilted her head slightly. "I'm looking for my seat." "Impossible." Patricia snatched the boarding pass from Diana's hand. "You people always try to sneak into first class." The entire cabin went silent, a long, still moment that felt like time refusing to move. Diana didn't argue, didn't fight back. She simply looked at Patricia with a calm so steady you had to wonder where she found it. And right here, this is where the real story begins. That morning in Portland might have been ordinary for most people, but it was anything but ordinary for Diana Carter. Because the moment Patricia Lowell yanked that boarding pass out of her hand, it was like a tiny needle pressing into old wounds, wounds that had healed over, yes, but had never truly disappeared. Over the years, Diana had trained herself not to react too quickly, not to confront, not to let anger dictate her choices. But behind that calm exterior was a long, quiet history of hurt that most people would never see. Diana was born in Eastbridge, a small, struggling neighborhood in southern Oregon, the kind of place where winters always felt a little colder than they should and summers always ran a little warmer. Weathered wooden houses lined the old streets, their darkened tin roofs wearing the weight of time, fences leaning with every push of the wind. She lived with her grandmother Hazel, a warm-voiced African-American woman with a low, steady tone who turned on the AM radio every morning for the news. In their tiny kitchen, the scent of cornbread and cinnamon always filled the house long before the sun climbed over the horizon. Diana loved mornings like that, quiet, simple, brimming with hope even though they never had much money. But from very early on, she learned that the world didn't see her the same way her grandmother saw her. When Diana was 8, Hazel took her on a bus ride into the city. That afternoon, the bus was packed. Diana remembered it. Clearly, a white woman stepped on, glanced at her grandmother, and said loudly enough for the entire bus to hear, "Why do they always sit here? This section isn't for them." The driver pretended not to hear. The passengers stayed silent. Hazel placed a gentle hand on Diana's shoulder and squeezed. No anger, no outburst. Just that soft squeeze, like she was saying, "Don't let this touch your heart, sweetheart." But it did touch her. Deeply. That day, Diana stared out the window for the rest of the ride. Snowflakes drifted down like thin white veils. And for the first time, she realized the color of her skin could determine where people believed she belonged. A few years later, at 14, Diana became obsessed with airplanes. Every weekend, she stood at the open field beside the old Eastbridge County Airport runway. When those aging Boeing 737 seconds landed, dust rose into the air, and the wind whipped through her loose curls. She watched the long bodies of the planes, their heavy wings stretching out, and thought, "One day I'm going to do something in this world, something big." But at the time, the world didn't see that possibility. A school counselor told her point blank, "Aviation isn't really for girls like you. You should look into something simpler." It wasn't just dismissive, it boxed her future into something small and predetermined. But strangely enough, that sentence became the spark that pushed her toward building her own path. At 17, Diana got a part-time job at a tiny grocery store on Redwood Street. She stocked shelves, swept floors, handled invoices, and sometimes helped the aging shop owner wrap deliveries. What no one knew was that every night after closing, Diana stayed an extra hour just to sit in the break room with the old radio. The radio didn't just play news. It played stories of a world far bigger than Eastbridge cities, glowing with lights, airports bustling with people, lives unfolding in places she had never seen. The slow, steady voice of the announcer convinced her that if she worked long enough and hard enough, she could walk in those busy places someday. Her grandmother was always her greatest inspiration. Hazel wasn't highly educated, she wasn't wealthy, but she taught Diana something no school ever could. If you want a seat in this world, build the chair yourself. Diana didn't fully understand it as a child, but now, years later, after literally building an airline from the ground up, her grandmother's words echoed louder than ever. At 19, Diana earned a scholarship to an aviation technical school. The day she received the letter, she raced home and held the paper up to her grandmother's face. Hazel just smiled and pulled her into a tight hug. "I told you, didn't I? Any door meant for you. No one can shut." But the door into aviation wasn't always open. During her first internship, when she arrived for an interview at a major airline, the manager looked her up and down and said, "You don't really look like someone who fits our image." Not rejected for her ability. Rejected for her image. Diana thanked him, stepped outside, and stood beneath a small awning while the April rain came down in sheets. Raindrops mixed with tears she refused to let fall. She wiped her face and whispered to herself, "I don't need to fit their image. I'll create my own." The years that followed were a blur of studying, working, and pushing herself to the brink. She spent her days learning about jet engines, her evenings working in warehouses to cover food and rent, and winter nights alone in the library reading until her eyes burned. But she never complained. She believed that every step, no matter how heavy, was leading her forward, even during the most painful moment of discrimination she had ever faced. At 22, during an internship meeting, a supervisor joked in front of everyone, "If she ever becomes a pilot, I'm retiring." Imagine her in command. Laughter filled the room, but his voice stayed with her for years, not because she wanted to be a pilot, but because of the way he said her. One small word, loaded with implication. That day, Diana sat alone at the train platform. The air was cold, her breath turning white. She watched trains thunder past and vanish into the dark. She asked herself a question that haunted her entire youth. Why should the world decide my limits because of my skin, my looks, or the way I speak? That quiet question became the foundation of everything she built afterward. At 24, at a small conference, she met Marcus Hale, the man who would later become the most influential mentor of her life. Marcus was the kind of person who could see straight through people within minutes. After their very first conversation, he told her, "You've got something that can move mountains, Diana, but you need to build the mountain first." That sentence opened the next chapter of her life. But of all her memories, none were as painful or as defining as the day her grandmother Hazel passed away from a minor stroke. Diana was sitting in a distant airport preparing to present an aviation project when the call came. She simply sat down, unable to speak. People walked back and forth around her, unaware that the young woman in the corner had just lost the most important person in her world. The days that followed were hollow, empty. But in that emptiness, her grandmother's words returned clear, as if she were standing right beside her. "If you want a seat in this world, build it yourself." And from that moment on, Diana decided to build something no one believed she could, an airline. A dream so enormous, people laughed at her for it. But to Diana, it wasn't a dream, it was her promise to Hazel. And the painful moments of her childhood, ironically, beautifully became the force that pushed her forward. Now, standing inside the aircraft cabin with Patricia Lowell ripping that ticket out of her hand, Diana didn't feel anger, she didn't feel hurt, she didn't feel shock. All she felt was a small sadness, soft and faint, like her grandmother's weary sigh all those years ago. Because sometimes, the world hasn't changed as much as we wish it had, and perhaps this moment was another test. A test Diana was more than ready to face. Not everyone becomes who they are today because of beautiful moments. Sometimes, it's the things that hurt us the most that create the most lasting drive. For Diana Carter, growing up was never a straight path. It was a maze of turns where every turn left a mark, sometimes so painful a young girl could barely make sense of it. At 15, Diana often sat in the backyard of her grandmother's house under an old apple tree whose twisted branches seemed to reach up toward the sky. There, she would read the books her grandmother picked up from the thrift store, books about science, about airplanes, about women of color who fought through prejudice to do extraordinary things. On windy days, apple leaves covered the yard. Hazel would bring her a cup of hot cinnamon tea and say, "You've got to learn how to stand firm when the wind blows hard, because the wind doesn't get to choose its direction, but you get to choose how you face it." At the time, those words felt too big for a teenage girl. But slowly, life began to explain to Diana what it really meant. to stand firm when the wind blows hard. The first time Diana truly came face to face with clear discrimination was at Eastbridge High School. That day, her class had a career guidance session. The teacher asked each student to write down the profession they dreamed of pursuing. Diana wrote aviation engineering. When she handed in her paper, the teacher, Mr. Brooks, looked at her and raised an eyebrow. Aviation engineering. Are you sure you don't want to pick something more realistic? A few classmates chuckled under their breath. Mr. Brooks went on, that field is very hard. It demands discipline, focus, and that environment just isn't for everyone. Diana stayed quiet. She didn't argue, but inside a strange feeling began to rise, like someone had just pressed gently on a wound she never knew she had. That night she told her grandmother what had happened. Hazel just rubbed her hands and asked, "Do you want to do it?" Diana nodded. "Do you have what it takes I do? Then don't let anyone tell you that you can't." The words were as light as the breeze, but a young girl held on to them like a promise. At 17, to save up and help with future college costs, Diana worked at a small convenience store on the corner of Redwood. The store was old and cramped, but the customers were kind. An old man who never stopped talking about fishing, a young couple who just moved into the neighborhood, a few college kids who dropped by for instant noodles. But not every customer was pleasant. One winter evening, the air was so cold her breath turned to white smoke. A man walked in, placed a bottle of water and a pack of cigarettes on the counter. Diana smiled as she took his money. He looked her up and down and said, "Funny. Didn't expect to see someone like you working here. Guess dreams don't always work out." No one else in the store heard it, but Diana heard every word. She kept smiling. But on her way home, as she passed the old apple tree in the backyard, she stopped and placed her hand on its freezing trunk. A quiet question rose in her mind. Why do they think they know me? That question followed her for many years. At 18, Diana entered university on a scholarship in aviation engineering. It was a huge victory, but also a real test. Her class was almost entirely male, mostly white. The classroom felt like a different world, a world where in just a glance people quickly assigned her a place, one she hadn't chosen. On the first day, when the professor asked everyone to introduce themselves, a guy sitting behind her muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "She's gonna drop the class in 2 weeks." Diana drew a small breath. She didn't turn around. She didn't react. She just opened a new notebook, flipped to the first page, and set her pen down. Let my actions answer, she thought. And her actions did answer. Diana studied day and night so much that her classmates eventually had to ask, "Why are you always in the library?" She just smiled softly. "I like quiet spaces." But the truth was, she was afraid that if she fell behind, even for a moment, people would use it to reinforce the idea that she doesn't belong here. One late night, the library was nearly empty, just her and the old librarian. Diana was slowly taking notes, eyelids heavy. The librarian walked by and quietly set a cup of hot cocoa on her desk. "Kids sometimes trying too hard can hurt, you know." Diana smiled. "I'm okay. I just want to prove something to myself." He looked at her and nodded with a gentle understanding. Sometimes, that's enough. That moment helped her realize, not everyone in the world was cold. But not everyone was kind either. At 20, during a lab session, the instructor told the class to form groups. Diana stood up to join one, but several groups immediately avoided her eyes. One group of 3 whispered among themselves and then said, "We're aiming for maximum efficiency here. Hope you understand." Diana pressed her lips together and nodded. No one realized that her smile at that moment was the only thing stopping her from breaking. In the end, she worked alone, submitted her own project, and received an A to the professor's surprise. Those who had rejected her glanced over at her, but none of them apologized. And Diana realized, not everyone who's wrong is brave enough to admit they're wrong. Those little cuts, built up over time. They didn't become open wounds, but they left quiet scars on her heart. Even so, alongside the pain, Diana was growing in another direction, strong, resilient, and steady to the point of seeming almost unshakable. She worked so hard that the professors in her department remembered her by name. She was so humble she always let others speak first. She was so thoughtful that people felt strangely at peace just sitting next to her. But few knew that every time she faced discrimination, her heart still skipped a beat. Softly, but honestly. At 22, another turning point hit. She was invited to interview for an internship at a major airline. Diana, prepared, meticulously dressed professionally, carried a folder full of her hard-earned achievements. But when she stepped into the meeting room, the recruiter, a middle-aged man, looked her over for a few seconds and said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're looking for candidates with a more fitting image." Diana asked Image, "What does that mean?" He answered without hesitation, "Someone who represents the brand better." One sentence, and it pulled back every childhood memory, from that comment on the bus to the mockery in the school hallway. All those fragments rose to the surface at once. She stood up, bowed her head politely, and walked out. The rain had started. The April downpour soaked her shoulders. People walked past her, not knowing she was silently asking herself, "How hard do I have to work just to be seen as a human being?" There was no answer, but in its place something else lit up inside her, a refusal to be broken. It was during that period that Diana met Marcus Hale, the man who would become her mentor and companion through her early years of building a career. That day was a small seminar about the future of aviation. Diana stood in a corner of the room, quietly observing. When the discussion ended, Marcus walked over and asked, "You had a question you didn't ask out loud, didn't you?" Diana was a little startled. Marcus smiled. "I see something in your eyes, something people have when they've been underestimated before." Diana told him about being rejected because of her image. Marcus listened for a long time, then said slowly, "You've got something a lot of people in this industry don't have: resilience. That's what builds the future." Then he added, "If you want a place in this industry, don't wait for them to invite you. Build the seat yourself." Those words, layered over her grandmother's old advice, came together like a quiet, steady flame. And from there, a thought appeared in Diana's mind, a thought even she found crazy at first. What if I start my own airline? That idea became a seed, and that seed began to sprout. She didn't tell anyone yet, but day by day it grew a little more, and all the pain she'd endured became the water that fed it. Because sometimes suffering doesn't make people collapse, it makes them impossible to collapse. Today, when Patricia Lowell stood in the middle of the first-class cabin and said, "You people don't belong here," Diana just stood still, not because she was weak, but because she'd been through enough to understand that how you react in a single moment matters less than how you choose to live your whole life. And Diana chose calm. But that calm was only the stillness before a storm. What was coming next would be far stronger. The moment Patricia Lowell snatched the ticket out of Diana Carter's hand, the air inside the cabin seemed to stretch tight. No one said a word, but every passenger's gaze was caught in the empty space between those two women. On one side, loud, showy arrogance. On the other, steady, unshaken, calm. Two opposite extremes, standing less than a step apart, yet separated by a lifetime of different experiences. Diana drew in a small breath. Not to gather courage, she'd lived through words that cut far deeper than this, but to keep her heart from rising into that familiar storm. She knew Patricia's type. She'd seen it since she was a kid, in school hallways, in meeting rooms, in every corner of the aviation world. The kind of people who believe they were born with the right to judge others. Patricia glared at the boarding pass like she was holding evidence in some major case. She flicked the paper a few times and said, her voice sharp enough to slice, "First class isn't for everyone, especially not for people who clearly don't fit the standard." A heavy silence dropped over the cabin, so heavy that a few passengers cleared their throats just to break the discomfort. Diana kept her gaze calm, but in her mind, a slow current of memories began to flow back. Memories of all the days she'd heard, "You don't fit," over and over and over again. As a child, she believed those words. Growing up, she questioned them. And now, she had gone far beyond the standard Patricia thought she represented. A young flight attendant, James Porter, stepped over, still wearing his professional smile, though worry was written all over his face. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Patricia turned to him like she'd just found backup. "The problem is, she's trying to sit in my seat. I know the difference between a real ticket and a fake one. I've worked in the industry. And trust me, this," she held Diana's boarding pass up like evidence, "is absolutely fake." James glanced at the ticket, then at Diana. He knew Diana, not her title but her character. Diana often flew undercover to check service quality, and internal staff had strict instructions to keep her identity completely confidential. James dipped his head slightly. This boarding pass is fully valid, ma'am. Patricia let out a cold, mocking laugh, a sharp, icy little sound dripping with self-righteousness. Then you're mistaken. There is no way someone like her is sitting in 1A. Any airline with standards wouldn't allow that. Diana didn't flinch, but her heart tightened for just an instant, a feeling so old, so familiar, a feeling she thought she'd grown past years ago. Not because Patricia was wrong, but because she was right, about how society used to see Diana. A man in seat 1B, a gray-suited businessman in his 50s, looked up. He seemed about to say something, then hesitated. And that hesitation hit Diana harder than Patricia's words. She wondered, why are the people who know what's right so often the quietest? An older woman in seat 2A watched Diana with sympathetic eyes, but she stayed silent too. Silence sometimes unintentionally builds a wall on the side of the one doing the hurting. Patricia turned back to Diana, her voice full of smug certainty. Who do you think you're fooling? Seat 1A is for VIPs. No one is going to believe you belong here. If you want to avoid trouble, go back to economy. Diana answered softly. This is my seat. We can sort this out calmly. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Oh, I'm perfectly calm. I'm just helping the airline avoid being taken advantage of by people who like to exploit loopholes. She dragged out the words those people like a nail driven straight into the air between them. Diana felt a small ache under her ribs, not because Patricia was insulting her, but because she knew there were thousands of passengers of color who'd stood exactly where she was standing now. People who were forced to stay quiet because no one stood up for them. If she stayed quiet today, her silence wouldn't just belong to her. Patricia kept going as if she wanted to carve her words into everyone's memory. I've worked in aviation operations for more than 10 years. I know what kind of people fit in first class and what kind doesn't. And trust me, Diana cut in gently. What exactly are you judging me on? Patricia looked her up and down without the slightest hint of embarrassment. On everything I see. You don't belong here. In that moment, a cold draft from the air vent brushed against Diana's neck. She closed her eyes for a second. Just 1 second. 1 second to remind herself, calm is not weakness. Calm is strength. James glanced at her eyes, silently asking, what do you want me to do? But because she was traveling undercover, he couldn't reveal her true identity without her permission. Patricia turned to James, raising her voice. See, she's not even denying it because she knows she's in the wrong. I demand you call security. A few passengers pulled out their phones, but only pretended to scroll, none of them stepping in. The cabin had become a stage with Patricia in the lead role, and everyone else reduced to passive spectators. Diana knew the humiliation wasn't just in the words themselves. It was in the way people took your silence as agreement. For a brief moment, Diana saw Hazel in her mind, standing in the cold wind, smiling softly as she said, you don't have to prove your worth by yelling louder than they do. You just have to keep standing. She opened her eyes, looked straight at Patricia. Her voice was soft but clear, like glass chiming. You're not trying to solve a problem. You're trying to make me smaller. The cabin froze. It was as if everyone had collectively stopped breathing. Patricia stiffened for a second, then let out a harsh, mocking laugh. So who exactly do you think you are? And that was when Diana realized this wasn't just a fight over a seat. This was a moment life had laid in front of her to test one thing. Was she strong enough to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been treated the way she was? Right now, James had just turned to look for help when the lead flight attendant, Ava Lane, walked over. Ava was seasoned, serious face, but kind eyes. Can someone tell me what's going on here? Patricia straightened up like a child reporting a crime to a teacher. She's trying to sit in the most expensive seat even though her ticket is clearly fake. I'm asking you to deal with this right now. Ava took the boarding pass, studied it carefully. Then she looked at Diana. For a brief moment, something like recognition flickered in her eyes, but she stuck to procedure. This boarding pass is valid, Ava said. Patricia's voice dropped an octave, laced with outrage. Are you kidding me? Someone like this in one? Diana closed her eyes for just a heartbeat. In that instant, she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a founder. She wasn't a woman who would go on to change aviation regulations. She was just that 8-year-old girl again, sitting on a bus next to her grandmother, hearing someone say, people like them aren't supposed to sit here. An old familiar pain had just been pulled awake. Ava's fingers tightened slightly around the ticket. She took a breath, and in a slow, clear voice she said, "Seat 1, A belongs to Miss Carter." A simple sentence, but it hit the cabin like metal striking tile. Patricia's eyes widened. No, no way. She turned back to Diana, glaring. "Who are you to sit in the best seat on this plane?" Diana opened her eyes. There was no rage in her gaze, only stillness. "I'm the person with the valid ticket, and I'm asking you to respect that." Her voice was as gentle as a breeze but carried enough strength to knock someone like Patricia off balance. Patricia snapped. "Security. I want security here. Now I am not sitting next to a fraud." Every eye in the cabin locked onto them. The air itself felt like it was shaking, signaling a real storm about to break. What Diana didn't know was, Ethan Blake, the captain of the flight, was standing right behind them witnessing everything, and his presence was about to change everything. But before Ethan spoke, the storm was still building, and Patricia Lowell still had no idea that the woman she was publicly humiliating was the very person who had built the airline she was flying on. The appearance of Ethan Blake, captain of the flight, wasn't dramatic. No one heard his footsteps. There was only a subtle shift in the air, like when a closed room feels different the moment a door quietly opens. Ethan stood a few steps away, silently taking it all in. His face didn't show much expression, but his eyes were razor sharp. They were the eyes of someone who'd been flying for over 20 years, who'd seen every type of passenger, every kind of situation. But what was happening today was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. Patricia still hadn't noticed he was there. She kept hurling accusations, her voice so loud that a few passengers further back were starting to frown. If first class lets people like this sit in 1A, then the standards have really gone downhill. I'm recording all of this and sending it straight to the airline. I guarantee you people are going to lose your jobs. She didn't look at anyone in particular as she spoke, but every word was pointed directly at Diana. Ava, the lead flight attendant, tried her best to stay calm. "Miss Lowell, I've already confirmed that Miss Carter's ticket is completely valid. I'm going to have to ask Patricia." Cut her off immediately, her voice sharp as a blade. "You think I'm going to trust your eyes? I've worked in this industry. I know what type of people are meant to sit here, and what type isn't." The whole cabin seemed to exhale at once. That phrase, "what type of people," wasn't subtle anymore. It was bare, blunt, impossible to misinterpret. Diana felt a chill run down her spine. Not from fear, but because she'd heard that phrase too many times in her life. Recognizing that contempt in someone's tone was a survival skill every person of color was forced to learn. James's hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to speak up, he wanted to protect her, but he knew Diana was flying undercover, and every move he made had to follow protocol. Ethan caught James's eye and gave him a quick look. "Leave this to me." But before Ethan could step in, Patricia suddenly lifted her phone high, holding it out in front of everyone, and started recording. Her voice turned hard and theatrical. "I'm gathering evidence. This is how an airline treats paying customers. They let people with questionable backgrounds sit in first class with fake tickets." Diana turned to look at her. In that moment, her eyes weren't as gentle as before. They held the depth of someone who'd walked through many storms and was still standing. Patricia mistook that for fear. She smirked. "That's right. Now you're scared because it's all on camera, huh?" But that smirk vanished the second Diana spoke, her voice low and steady. "You're misunderstanding something much bigger than you realize." Patricia raised an eyebrow, folding her arms. "Oh, really? You think you know aviation law now?" Diana answered slowly. "I understand that you're not attacking me. You're attacking the image of who you think I represent." The cabin seemed to tremble. A few passengers put their phones down. Some looked up, and in that moment the truth surfaced. This wasn't about a seat anymore. This was about belonging. Patricia burst into harsh laughter. "Oh, please, you talk like you're someone important. Who are you? Just a random passenger, someone who shouldn't even be in this cabin." Diana didn't respond. She just kept looking at Patricia, as if she could see everything hiding behind the perfect makeup, insecurity, forced superiority, and a deep fear of losing status. Ethan stepped forward. His voice came out low and calm. "What seems to be the issue here?" He didn't speak loudly, but it was enough to make everyone turn. Patricia instantly switched to her "I'm the victim here" smile. "Oh, thank God you're here. This woman is using a fake ticket to steal my seat. I demand that you remove her from this flight immediately." Ethan looked at Diana. Their eyes met a brief, quiet recognition. Diana tilted her head just slightly, as if to say, Don't reveal who I am. Not yet. Ethan understood. He turned to Patricia. Miss Lowell, we can't make any decisions until everything is properly verified. Patricia snapped back, irritated. What is there to verify? Just look at her. Look at the way she's dressed. Look at that old beat-up bag. She clearly doesn't belong in first class. A sharp breath escaped someone from a row behind, someone offended on Diana's behalf. Diana felt a small ache in her chest, not because of Patricia's words, but because a tiny part of her, the part that had once been that little girl on the bus, had been poked again. But she kept her composure as naturally as breathing. Ethan looked at Patricia and said slowly, Miss Lowell, in our industry, how a passenger dresses is not grounds to question whether their ticket is valid. Patricia shook her head, almost shouting now. Oh yeah, what about skin color? Don't tell me that doesn't matter. The air froze. Every passenger went silent. Ava stood completely still. That sentence crossed every line. Diana closed her eyes for just a second. Just one short second, but in it a lifetime of moments rushed back. All the rejections, the doubts, the times she'd been told she wasn't up to standard. Patricia went on, completely unaware she was driving straight into the deepest wound. I'm just being honest. If we don't say these things out loud, then what's the point of having standards? First class is not a place for every type of person. That phrase, every type of person, cut like a blade. Ethan's hand tightened. Miss Lowell, I'm going to have to ask you to stop. Now. Patricia folded her arms, defiant. Or what, you'll throw me off this flight for telling the truth. Ethan didn't answer, but the air around him changed. Ava could feel it, that rare, heavy seriousness from a captain who'd seen it all. Diana opened her eyes. She stepped forward. Her voice was low and soft, but every word landed with the weight of stone. Miss Lowell, you're doing something you won't be able to take back. Patricia let out a sharp laugh. Oh, really? You going to sue me for saying you don't belong here? Diana looked straight into her eyes. No, I'm just saying that sometimes the things we say out loud reflect who we are more clearly than any mirror ever could. Patricia scoffed. Cheap philosophy. But right then, a woman in seat 3C who had been silent the entire time suddenly spoke up. I think she's right. Patricia spun around. Whose side are you on? The woman replied calmly. I'm not taking sides. I'm just saying, judging someone because they're not like you has never been the right thing to do. Another voice chimed in. I agree. Then another. You've gone too far, Miss Lowell. For the first time, Patricia was no longer standing on the approved side of the crowd. The eyes on her weren't admiring or supportive anymore. They were disapproving, critical. Fear, the thing she hid the most, started to show on her face. Diana stayed quiet. She stepped half a pace back, not retreating, just letting Patricia's own words expose themselves. Ethan looked at Ava, then at the rest of the cabin. He knew this was no longer just a passenger conflict. This was a serious discrimination incident, and it had to be treated like one. Before Ethan could make any official statement, Patricia screamed, almost desperate. You're all wrong. I'm the only one here who knows how an airline is supposed to be run. I've worked in aviation for more than 10 years. I know I'm right. Diana watched her. There was no anger left in her expression. No visible hurt. Only a strange, quiet understanding. She spoke softly. Miss Lowell, sometimes experience doesn't make us better. It just magnifies the prejudice we were already carrying inside. The cabin fell completely silent. Then Ethan said, I'm going to have to handle this situation according to protocol. Patricia whipped around. If you so much as touch me, your career is over. Ethan replied slowly. I'm not afraid of losing my career, when what I'm protecting is basic respect. In that moment, Diana felt it clearly. The fuse had been lit, and from here on out, everything was going to escalate quickly. But Patricia still had no idea she was standing right on the edge of a collapse, one she had built with her own hands. The first-class cabin was so quiet you could hear the soft, steady hum of the air vents above. It wasn't a normal silence. It was the kind of silence that waits for something to explode. Patricia Lowell was still standing in the aisle, clutching her phone so tightly her palms were shaking, but she pretended it was anger, not fear. Diana Carter stood right in front of her, not taking a single step back. Not because she wanted to provoke, not because she needed to win, but because she knew this moment didn't belong to her alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been doubted, belittled, or labeled not good enough simply because they didn't match someone else's idea of who belonged. Captain Ethan Blake, took a quiet breath. With all his years of experience, he knew passengers could cause trouble, argue, complain, but rarely did he see a situation where discrimination was so clear it was almost undeniable. He looked at Diana. Her eyes held layers of emotion, calm, sadness, a hint of exhaustion, but absolutely no fear. Ethan turned to Patricia. "Miss Lowell, I'm asking you to lower your voice. This is not an appropriate way to speak on this flight," Patricia scoffed. "I speak appropriately to the right people." "Someone like her doesn't," Ava, the lead flight attendant, cut in immediately. "Miss Lowell, that's enough." For the first time, there was a sharp edge in Ava's voice, none of the usual softness. But Patricia still wouldn't stop. She leaned in closer to Diana and spat out, "You are not sitting in 1A. I will not allow that to happen." A passenger behind them exhaled sharply. Has she lost her mind? Another whispered just loud enough to be heard, "Why are they letting this go on so long?" Diana heard all of it, like waves breaking on the shore. But she didn't let any of it reach her heart. She simply looked at Patricia and asked, "Why do you think you have the right to decide where I get to sit?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "Because I know the standards of this industry. I know what kind of people belong." Diana finished for her gently, "And what kind of people don't." Patricia froze for a beat, and that tiny beat of silence exposed her more than any argument could. A voice came from seat 2B. "You're talking like you own the plane." A man in 3F added, "It's embarrassing to behave like this at your age." An older woman in 1C, her voice trembling but firm, said, "Miss Carter hasn't done anything wrong. She's just standing where she's supposed to be." Patricia spun around, her face reddening. "You don't understand. This is about security, about a fake ticket. You're all being fooled." Ethan stepped in, his voice low but sharp as steel. "Miss, Carter's ticket has already been verified 3 times. There is no sign of fraud." Patricia pressed her lips together, then suddenly shouted, "Then who bought her ticket? Who can even afford a first-class seat like this for her?" It sounded like a simple question, but it wasn't simple at all. It dragged an old, ugly prejudice right into the middle of that airplane. It implied someone like Diana couldn't possibly be wealthy enough, couldn't possibly be successful enough, couldn't possibly be worthy enough to be in that seat. For the first time since boarding, Diana felt a very real pain. Not because of the insult itself, but because she knew how many other people of color had heard that same question and stayed silent. She didn't want to stay silent anymore. Diana took a half step forward. The space between her and Patricia was now just an arm's length. Her voice was soft, almost too soft for the tension in the air. "Miss Lowell, I don't need you to believe me, but you do need to learn to respect where other people stand, even when you don't understand them." Patricia burst out laughing. "You talk like you're someone important. Who are you to tell me what to respect?" A male voice from the back answered for her. "She's a passenger, and that's enough." Patricia whipped around trying to find who had spoken, but the cabin had already started shifting toward Diana's side. A young woman held her phone up. "I'm recording this. Racial discrimination on a flight is a federal violation." An Asian man leaned toward his wife and murmured, "It's been years since I've seen something like this." The cabin was no longer silent. Whispers spread, grew louder, rolling through the plane like a wave. Patricia started to panic, not because she realized she was wrong, but because she was used to being on the approved side of the room, and for the first time in her life she was standing alone. Ethan stepped fully between them now. "I need everyone to stay calm. And let me be very clear. No one has the right to remove a passenger with a valid ticket from their seat. And no one has the right to insult another person based on race, gender, or any other personal trait." He turned to Diana, his tone much softer. "Miss Carter, would you like to file a report about this behavior right now?" All eyes in the cabin shifted to Diana. The moment stretched out. It felt like everyone was waiting for her to hand down a verdict. Diana glanced down at her hands for a second. They weren't shaking. She knew she held far more power in this moment than Patricia ever had, but she also knew this world didn't just need punishment. It needed people who could choose the right response at the right time. She shook her head slightly. "I don't want to do that." "Not yet." Patricia exhaled in relief, thinking she'd just won. But Diana continued, her voice deeper now, round and decisive. "I don't want to do that yet, because I want to give you a chance to look at your own actions first." The cabin went dead silent again. No one said a word. Even the sound of the air conditioning seemed to fade into the background. Diana looked at Patricia and her eyes weren't just calm, they were sad. You're treating me like you know exactly who I am, but you don't know anything. Not about me, not about my life, not about what I had to overcome just to stand here. Patricia muttered, I don't need to know. Diana replied softly. That is exactly your problem. One sentence, but it felt like a door swinging open on the truth. The truth that Patricia wasn't fighting to protect a seat. She was fighting to protect an idea, the idea that only a certain kind of person deserved to exist in spaces she considered elite. Ethan stepped forward slowly. I'll be requesting security to meet the flight at the gate when we land. An incident report will be filed. Patricia screamed, You have no right to do that. I work in this industry, I know the law. Ava stared straight at her. And because you work in this industry, you especially don't have the right to behave this way. This time, Patricia had no answer. Diana moved back toward her seat 1A, but she didn't sit down yet. She looked around the cabin. The passengers' eyes were full of empathy. A few gave her small, encouraging smiles. She nodded slightly. This moment hurt, but it was proof that not everyone in the world was like Patricia. As Diana rested her hand on the headrest about to sit, Patricia snapped one last time. I still don't believe you belong in that seat. Not in a million years. Diana turned back, but this time her eyes weren't sad and they weren't wounded. They were the eyes of someone who knew exactly who she was. She spoke slowly. You don't have to believe me, but you're going to find out soon enough that you just insulted the wrong person. Patricia frowned, confused. Ethan looked at Diana, tilting his head slightly as if asking, Is it time? Diana gave the slightest shake of her head. Not yet. The real storm was still coming. The cabin gradually settled. James closed the overhead bins, passengers buckled their seatbelts. The plane prepared for pushback. But no one knew that just a few hours from now, the truth about Diana Carter would make the entire cabin and the rest of the world sit up in stunned disbelief. The low rumble of the engines began to vibrate beneath the cabin floor, creating a steady, pulsing rhythm like the heartbeat of some enormous bird. The plane slowly pushed back from the gate, sunlight sliding across the windows, spilling over the passengers' faces. But in first class, no one was really paying attention to the view outside. They were still wrapped in the aftermath of the confrontation, a clash no one expected to get that intense. Patricia Lowell dropped heavily into seat 1B, her face pulled tight with anger and humiliation. Her hand was still gripping her phone like a weapon she refused to put down. 2 rows back, people were still whispering, I can't believe she actually said those things. Miss Carter was so calm. If I were her, I don't think I could have handled it. But beneath all the murmurs, Diana Carter stayed silent. She sat in seat 1A, her seat, but her back wasn't fully resting against it. It was as if she was still holding on to some of the weight inside, refusing to let it sink into her body. Lead flight attendant Ava Lane leaned slightly toward her. Miss Carter, if you need any support, please let me know. Diana offered a small smile. I'm okay, Ava. Thank you. Ava paused for just a second when she heard Diana say her name. Most passengers didn't remember a flight attendant's name that quickly. But she just nodded and stepped back without asking anything more. As the plane picked up speed, the roar of the engines grew louder, pushing every smaller sound into the background. The passengers had no choice but to focus on the moment of takeoff. All except Patricia. She turned toward Diana, lowering her voice, but not low enough to go unheard. Go ahead and enjoy that seat while you can. Once we land, I guarantee you'll be the one apologizing to me. Diana didn't look at her. She looked out the window instead. The sky was opening up in front of her, a soft reminder. When you fly high enough, the noise below stops mattering. Patricia kept going. I've worked in this industry. I have connections. They're going to take care of you. Diana gently rested her hand on the armrest. Miss Lowell, what you just said, that's exactly what makes this industry worse. Patricia frowned. Worse, because I know how to tell right from wrong. Diana turned, meeting her eyes, not with hatred, not with anger. Just with plain truth, no. Because you use your position to convince yourself you have the right to put other people beneath you. Patricia opened her mouth to fire back, but right then the plane lifted off the ground. Gravity pressed down gently on everyone's chest. Her words got stuck. That brief moment of takeoff, short but beautiful, became an invisible line in time before it was chaos after it. Something else was waiting to be revealed. The plane leveled off. The seatbelt sign turned off. James, the young flight attendant, stepped out to start drink service. He did his best to stay professional, but his eyes kept flicking toward Diana, full of worry. He knew exactly who she was. He knew the pressure she was under, and he knew no airline manual had ever prepared anyone for a situation where the person being discriminated against was the founder of the airline itself. James set a glass of water on Diana's tray table. "Miss Carter, if you need anything." Diana laid a light hand on his arm, steadying him. "James, I'm all right. Thank you." Her voice was soft, but it carried weight. James exhaled, pressed his lips together, and moved on. He didn't dare reveal the truth. Not yet. From 1B, Patricia called out loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "I want water too." "Still. And don't bring me one of those ugly plastic cups." Ava shook her head slightly. People like Patricia were so used to being catered to that they thought it gave them the right to treat others badly. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. No one said anything more. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was like a thin layer of ice over a lake, pretty to look at, but one wrong step and it would crack open. And what cracked the ice first came from something no one expected: Diana's old leather bag. In the chaos earlier, the bag had been left slightly open. A small object had slipped out and slid under the seat. James bent down to pick it up for her, and the moment his eyes landed on it, his heart almost stopped. It was a SkyVista Airlines ID badge. But not just any badge. It was an executive founder badge, of which there was only one in the world. James froze. Diana saw the way he held his breath. She gave the slightest shake of her head as if to say, "Don't. Not yet." James swallowed hard, slipped the badge back into her bag, making sure no one else saw it, but a thin layer of sweat had already formed on his forehead. Because now he understood. This wasn't just about who's right and who's wrong anymore. They were speeding toward a moment that, if recorded and released, could become the biggest PR storm the airline had ever faced. From seat 3C, the older woman leaned forward and spoke softly to Diana. "Sweetheart, you don't have to endure all this." Diana smiled, her voice as light as mist. "I'm not enduring. I'm choosing not to let someone pull me down to their level." The woman placed a hand over Diana's. "Then, you're a lot stronger than most people realize." Patricia heard that. She barked out a loud laugh. "So what my damage today is, I get a free moral lecture." Diana didn't respond. She turned back to the window, watching layers of white clouds stacked one over another, so beautiful that there was no room left for hatred. But then Patricia lit another fuse herself. She shot out of her seat, lunged for the overhead bin, threw it open, and started digging around like she was hunting for evidence. Ava rushed toward her. "Miss Lowell." "You cannot search other people's belongings," Patricia yelled. "I know she's hiding something. There's no way someone like her bought that ticket. There has to be proof. Proof." The word rang through the cabin like metal slamming on metal. The passengers, who had only watched in silence, started to get angry. "Are you insane? This is harassment. You have no right to touch her things." Diana stood up, gently, unhurried, without a trace of panic. She walked over to Patricia, who now looked like someone completely out of control. Diana placed her hand on the overhead bin and closed it, very softly. In that moment, Patricia turned. Her eyes were red with rage. And that was when Diana said the sentence that later social media would repeat millions of times: "Miss Lowell, you don't need to look for proof about me, because the truth is going to find you." Patricia sneered. "What truth?" Diana took a step toward the sliver of light coming through the nearby window. It cast her shadow long across the aisle. She squared her shoulders and looked at Patricia with a calm so strange it almost didn't belong in a scene like this. "The truth about why I'm sitting in 1A." A few passengers held their breath. James froze. Ava pressed a hand over her heart, sensing something was coming. Patricia narrowed her eyes. "Then say it." "Who are you?" Diana was about to speak. But right then the overhead speakers crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, Ethan Blake." The entire cabin turned toward the cockpit. Ethan's voice was low but loaded with meaning. "I'd like to let you know that on today's flight, we have a very important member of the airline on board," passengers murmured. A few of them glanced at Diana, as if something was beginning to click. Patricia laughed loudly. "Oh, don't tell me you think he's talking about you. That's ridiculous." But Diana just kept her eyes forward, and inside her, a new chapter was about to begin. A chapter Patricia Lowell never saw coming. Captain Ethan Blake's voice continued through the speakers, steady, warm, carrying the unmistakable tone of respect reserved for only the most important announcements. And today we are honored to have on board someone very special to SkyVista Airlines. Someone who helped shape the quality of service you experience every time you fly with us. Inside the first-class cabin, the air seemed to stop moving. A man in row 2 looked around, curious. A young woman in row 3 leaned forward, trying to see who the pilot might be referring to. Only Patricia Lowell laughed, a sharp, mocking laugh drenched in blind confidence. Oh, wonderful. Must be some VIP. Let's see if Miss Carter over here decides to pretend she's important. Diana said nothing. She simply inhaled slowly, as if preparing herself for a moment she had lived through many times, but never inside an airplane that existed because of her own work. The captain continued, "This guest is seated in our first-class cabin, and on behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to extend our deepest respect to Ava Lane." The lead flight attendant stood a few steps away. She held her breath. James, the young flight attendant, froze mid-pour, the glass on his tray trembling slightly. Ethan Blake's voice dropped firm and unmistakable, the founder and CEO of SkyVista Airlines, Miss Diana Carter. The final words struck the cabin like a thunderclap. Silence. A silence so complete it was possible to hear the steady hum of the engines outside. Seconds passed as passengers looked around, and eventually every gaze fell toward seat 1A, where Diana sat. Still calm, still gentle, still the same quiet presence she had been through the entire ordeal. Patricia blinked once, then again. Her face drained of color as if someone had pulled the plug on her entire bloodstream. No, that's impossible. But the truth had been spoken aloud. There was no room left for denial. Ava reacted first. She placed a hand on her chest, bending toward Diana in a gesture close to reverence. "Miss Carter, it's an honor to serve you today." The entire cabin rippled with murmurs. A man in row 2 whispered, astonished, "Oh my God, I've read articles about her." Another leaned toward his partner. "I can't believe we're on the same flight as the CEO." James stood frozen. Everything he had been trying to protect was now out in the open, and he wondered in just a few minutes, would everyone know about the ugly confrontation that happened right before this announcement? Patricia remained standing. She stared at Diana as though staring at something that simply could not be real. "No, you're all lying. This is some kind of joke. Someone like her, she can't be a CEO." Diana turned toward her eyes, calm but impossibly deep. "Miss Lowell, I never use my position to make others feel small, but you forced me to clarify the truth today." Patricia stumbled back a step. I didn't know. I didn't know." Diana nodded gently. "You're right. You didn't know. But you chose to believe the worst about me anyway, without evidence, without checking. All you needed was the color of my skin." Several passengers lowered their eyes, realizing they too had once held such unspoken assumptions. Patricia stammered. I just thought you thought I didn't belong here." Diana finished for her. Her voice was soft, but it cut through every heart in the cabin. James swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Miss Lowell, you verbally attacked a first-class passenger. You went through someone else's belongings. You caused a disruption. And now it turns out you targeted the CEO of the very airline you bragged about having connections in." He paused. "The same airline you used to threaten people." Patricia panicked, stepping backward. I didn't know. If I had known she was the CEO, Diana looked straight at her. Her voice, quiet, steady. "You would have behaved politely, or at least respectfully." Patricia froze. Diana continued, "But you didn't know. And that moment, that is when people show who they really are." The cockpit door opened, a rare move while the plane was in flight. Captain Ethan stepped out, face firm, stride confident. "Miss Lowell, under aviation safety regulations, harassment of passengers is taken extremely seriously." Patricia reached toward him, pleading, "Captain Blake, I work in this industry. I know the procedures I have." "Influence," Ethan cut her off sharply. "The only influence you have right now is the damage you caused in front of more than 100 witnesses." Patricia looked around. Many passengers weren't angry anymore. They were disappointed that an adult could hold so much arrogance and prejudice. The cabin fell silent again. But this silence was different, not tense, not cold. It was the silence of truth, settling into place. The silence of a lesson no one present would forget. Diana lowered herself back into her seat, taking a deep breath. Not out of triumph, but to steady her heart after the emotional storm. She turned to Patricia. Miss Lowell, I don't believe in humiliating people, but I do believe in accountability. Patricia trembled. Her voice was barely audible. Diana continued her tone, heavy with memory rather than anger. When you spoke to me the way you did, I didn't just hear your words. I heard the echoes of every moment in my past, the jobs I was denied because of my skin, the meetings where I had to work twice as hard to be heard, the times I was told I didn't fit the image. You weren't just attacking me, you were attacking all the people who've lived through the same thing. Patricia's eyes dropped. Diana looked out the window. Layers of white clouds drifted by, soft as cotton. Quietly, she added, but I will not retaliate. A man in row 2 began clapping softly. Then another joined, then another. Not applause for a victory, but applause for strength, the kind that stays gentle even after being bruised. Ava stepped forward, standing beside Diana like a silent show of support. Miss Carter, we'll document everything. Security will meet the aircraft on landing. Diana nodded. Handle it exactly by protocol. No more, no less. Patricia burst into tears. Miss Carter, please. I'm sorry. I was wrong. But please don't let this ruin my life. Diana watched her for a long moment. No anger in her eyes, no revenge. Just the exhaustion of someone who has seen too many injustices repeated over time. Miss Lowell, I'm not destroying your life. You're doing that yourself. Patricia collapsed into her seat, hands trembling violently. The aircraft continued its flight. Children slept. Adults exhaled in relief. And Diana watched the sky outside her window. She remembered something Marcus Hale, her mentor, once told her: justice doesn't always arrive on time, but it always arrives the moment someone tries to take it away from you. Diana closed her eyes. The sky seemed more beautiful than ever, because somewhere above those clouds, the truth had finally spoken. The cabin speakers chimed again, signaling the start of descent. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our initial descent in just a few minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts. Captain Ethan Blake's voice was steady as always, but to those in first class, each word carried an extra weight. The moment of reckoning was getting close. No one spoke. No one dared disturb the heavy silence settling over the cabin. Diana rested her head gently against the one, a headrest, eyes drifting toward the window. Below them, the wide Texas landscape unfolded, sunlight turning patches of cloud into glowing white sails. This was supposed to be a simple business trip, a routine journey to check on service quality, a quiet day meant for observing from the shadows. But life rarely follows our plans. Sometimes, it hands you a test you never asked for. In seat 1B, Patricia Lowell sat curled inward suddenly, small like a child who'd finally realized the weight of her own behavior. The sharpness in her gaze was gone, the bravado gone. Only trembling hands and reddened eyes remained the look of someone who had just lost something more precious than pride. Ava Lane walked the aisle, her professional calm unbroken. But when her eyes brushed past Patricia, something flickered across her expression, a blend of disappointment and pity. She couldn't fathom how a grown woman could utter words so cruel, but what she understood even less was how Diana had stayed so astonishingly composed through it all. A man in row 2 leaned forward slightly and spoke softly to Diana. Miss Carter, I'm sorry for what you went through. Someone should have spoken up earlier. Diana shook her head gently. An airplane is a sensitive space. People stay quiet because they're afraid of escalating things. I understand. Still, what you endured wasn't right. No one should have to face that. Diana offered a faint smile, one not born from joy, but from someone who's known these battles far too many times. This wasn't the first time, and I doubt it will be the last. Today is just another chapter. James approached with a tray of drinks, though it was obvious he was looking for a reason to talk. Miss Carter, I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. James. Diana gently touched the edge of his tray. You did exactly what you were trained to do. You protected dignity on this plane. No one could have done more. James lowered his eyes, humbled by her grace. Behind them, Patricia heard every word. She squeezed her eyes shut, unable to bear the contrast between Diana's dignity and her own behavior. How can you stay so calm? Patricia whispered suddenly, her voice as faint as a draft. Diana turned to her, not with judgment, not with anger, but with quiet honesty. I don't stay calm because I'm used to being mistreated. I stay calm because I refuse to let you decide who I become. Patricia inhaled shakily. I know I was wrong, but you have to understand I just thought. You thought I didn't belong here. Diana finished gently. And that is exactly the problem. Patricia bit her lip as though wanting to apologize, yet held back by the last fragile remnants of her pride. Then came the chime, the familiar ding signaling the final descent. Captain Ethan's voice filled the cabin again. Ladies and gentlemen, airport security in Dallas has been notified. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. The seriousness in his tone made several passengers exchange worried glances. This was no longer a minor dispute. It was now an aviation security incident, something every airline was required to handle with full transparency. The aircraft dipped lower. The city of Dallas rose up to meet them, skyscrapers glittering in the sun like polished steel. Diana inhaled deeply. Her heartbeat quickened not from fear but from memories flooding back. The job interviews where her honors degree hadn't mattered. The sideways glances when she'd been seated in first class years ago. The meetings where she had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect. A quiet part of her asked, "Did I really have to become CEO before I was treated fairly?" But then she remembered the proud eyes of the older woman in 3C, and Marcus Hale's voice. "You don't fight to prove you deserve a place. You fight to stay true to your values." Diana closed her eyes briefly. Yes, she was doing exactly that. The wheels touched down. The cabin jolted lightly, then steadied as the plane raced along the runway. A sigh rippled through the passengers. Patricia, meanwhile, clutched the armrest like someone bracing for the fall of her entire world. In her mind, a storm of fears spun uncontrollably: social media, her job, her reputation, all the things she thought she controlled, now dangling by a thread she herself had frayed. She turned to Diana, voice trembling. "Miss Carter, I'm sorry. Please don't let this destroy me." Diana faced her. Her eyes carried no triumph, only the weary humanity of someone who had seen too many injustices repeat themselves. "Miss Lowell, I don't control the consequences of your actions. I only control how I respond." Patricia's breath hitched. Her last line of defense pride collapsed completely. The aircraft slowed to a stop. "Welcome to Dallas," the speaker chimed. But no one stood. Outside the cabin door, through a narrow gap in the curtain, silhouettes of airport, police, and security staff were visible, waiting. Ava stepped forward, voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We will need to escort one passenger before deplaning begins." Patricia hid her face in her hands. No, please don't take me out in front of everyone." Several passengers lowered their eyes, not out of contempt but out of respect for the painful moment unfolding. Diana stood. She walked toward Patricia slowly, and in a voice meant only for the two of them, she said, "Miss Lowell, I don't want to see anyone destroyed, but I do want you to understand something." Patricia looked up, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Your actions carry weight. They affect real people, real feelings, real wounds." Patricia's chin quivered. I know, but I wish I could take back what I said." Diana shook her head gently. "We can't take back what we've said, but we can choose what we say next." That moment, brief, private, raw, was the most human moment of the entire incident. Not victory, not revenge, insight, a painful, necessary awakening. Ava approached softly. "Miss Lowell, it's time." Patricia stood, legs weak. Two security officers stepped in. The cabin went silent. No one filmed, no one cheered, no one treated this like entertainment. Because when a person meets the consequences of their actions, the only humane response is silence. Diana turned away, not out of coldness, but out of respect for Patricia's final, small shred of dignity. When the cabin finally settled, Ava asked quietly, "Miss Carter, are you all right?" Diana nodded. "I'm all right, but today reminded me how much work we still have to do." Ava offered a sad smile. "Thanks to you, at least something has changed." Diana didn't ask what. She already understood. As she gathered her things and stepped toward the exit, sunlight from the jet bridge poured over her face. A new day was waiting. But the journey of truth was far from over. The aircraft door swung open, and a wave of hot, dry Texas air rushed in, carrying that familiar scent of the runway metal fuel and something else only frequent flyers really recognize. One by one, passengers began to stand, but no one rushed to leave. They lingered there in the aisle as if tethered to what they'd just witnessed, a moment nobody wanted but everyone knew they would remember. Diana Carter stayed seated until the end. Not because she demanded it, but because Ava Lane, the lead flight attendant, lightly touched her arm. "Miss Carter, security would like to speak with you just to confirm what happened. They're waiting at the end of the jet bridge." Diana nodded. No complaints, no sighs. She simply accepted it as another part of the responsibility this day had placed on her. Before standing, she took one last look around the cabin. Those faces, some with red eyes, some quiet, some apologizing with nothing more than a look, all blended into a strange feeling inside her. Warmth, yes, but also a deep, familiar exhaustion. She knew. This was no longer just her story. As the passengers filed out ahead of her, many of them kept glancing back over their shoulders at Diana. A middle-aged man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "She stayed so calm. If that were me, I would have lost it." His wife squeezed his hand. She's had to fight this her whole life, and she still chose kindness. That sentence, though soft, made Diana's shoulders sink a little. Because it was true, painfully true. The jet bridge led straight into the terminal where 2 security officers and an airport manager were waiting. They didn't look at Diana with curiosity or suspicion. They looked at her like they already knew her, like they'd seen her in articles, in interviews, in internal memos, like they understood just how serious this incident was. "Miss Carter," the manager said, voice low and respectful, "we're deeply sorry for what happened today. We'll need a brief statement from you to complete the report." Diana nodded. "I understand. Go ahead. Follow the protocol." It was a simple response, but it made the security team exchange a quick glance. Not every CEO is willing to be treated like just another passenger, but to Diana this wasn't about status. This was about making sure the system worked the way it was supposed to. They began asking questions. Diana answered slowly, clearly, not exaggerating, not softening, not dramatizing. Patricia's behavior just laying out the facts like she was recounting someone else's story. The manager wrote everything down occasionally, looking up at her with a kind of stunned respect. Ava stood behind Diana, fingers laced together, still tense from the chaos on board. James stood near the doorway, head slightly bowed as if he were afraid that meeting Diana's eyes might make him break down. When they were almost done, James stepped forward quietly. "Miss Carter, I just wanted to say, I'm proud to work for your airline, and I'm sorry we couldn't protect you more today." Diana looked at the young man's face, the uncertainty, the guilt, the earnestness of someone in his 20s trying to do the right thing in a situation way bigger than his job description. She set a hand on his shoulder. "James, sometimes protecting someone doesn't mean standing in front of them. It just means not standing with the people who hurt them." James lowered his head quickly, hiding the gloss in his eyes. Once the report was finished, Diana left the security checkpoint and stepped into the main terminal of Dallas Airport. And then, for a brief second, it felt like the whole place paused. A small group of passengers from her flight were waiting nearby. No one shouted. No one clapped. No one made a show out of it. But as she walked past, they nodded to her one by one. A slight nod, but filled with a quiet respect. A woman whispered as Diana passed, "Thank you for standing your ground like that. It gives the rest of us hope." A man added, "You did something I wish I'd had the courage to do once." Diana nodded back, not claiming to be a hero, not rejecting the weight of what they were saying either. But as she stepped out toward the arrivals area, the real storm began to roll in. Not from the press, not from the airline's PR team, but from social media. James hurried after her, phone in hand, clearly shaken. "Miss Carter, this is spreading really fast." Ava skimmed through his screen, eyes widening. "The video. It's already online." Diana slowed her pace. "What video?" James swallowed and held the phone up. The passenger in row 4 recorded most of the argument. On the screen, the footage was grainy but clear enough. Patricia's voice rang out. "People like you don't belong in first class. She's lying. People like her always lie. I work in aviation. I know fraud when I see it." Then came the moment Captain Ethan's voice cut through it all. founder and CEO of SkyVista Airlines, Miss Diana Carter. Outside the context of the cabin, the words sounded even louder, sharper, more explosive. Ava exhaled slowly. Oh God, this is spreading like wildfire. James looked at Diana. Miss Carter, do you want us to try to get the video taken down? Diana looked at the screen, at her own face, frozen mid-scene calm collected in the middle of chaos. She drew in a breath, then let it out slowly. No, leave it up. Ava stared at her. Are you sure? This could turn into a huge PR mess. Diana shook her head. PR problems don't come from the truth. They come from hiding it. The words made James stop dead in his tracks. Diana kept walking toward the exit, her old leather bag in hand, her steps as steady as if she'd just gotten off any other flight. But inside, she knew. She had just stepped into a very different kind of battle, not against one passenger, but against the way the world still viewed people who looked like her. She understood. That video had just become something powerful, a reminder that prejudice is still here. But so is the truth, and this time the truth was not going to be buried. As she neared the final doors out of the terminal, a familiar voice called from behind her, Diana. She turned. It was Marcus Hale, her old mentor, the man who'd guided her in her early days in aviation. His hair was grayer than the last time she'd seen him, but his eyes were still the same kind, grounded eyes she'd always trusted. Kid, they're talking about you everywhere. Diana let out a soft breath. I didn't mean for this to become a big thing. Marcus gave a sad little smile. Prejudice made it big on its own. All you did was pull the blindfold off. Diana stayed quiet. Marcus rested a hand on her shoulder. You did something most people can't. You kept your heart intact in the middle of a storm. His voice slowed like he was reminding himself as much as her. And that is what makes people truly respect you. Diana glanced down at her worn shoes. Suddenly the exhaustion of the day settled over her like a heavy coat. I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of this, she said softly. Marcus nodded. And because that's how you think, that video is going to change things. Diana looked up at him. Change. For the better. Marcus smiled. For better. And for real. As she stepped out of the airport, the Texas sun washed over her warm and bright. The video was spreading. People were arguing, reacting, choosing sides. News outlets would probably be replaying it by tonight. But right there in the heat, the glare, the shimmering air above the pavement, Diana felt only one clear truth. She had done the right thing, and now the truth had wings of its own. The Dallas afternoon sun blazed so brightly it was almost blinding, but even that couldn't compete with the speed at which the airplane video spread. Barely an hour had passed since Diana stepped off the plane, yet the storm was already well underway. As she and Marcus walked toward the taxi stand, his phone buzzed nonstop. He glanced at the screen, sighed deeply, then said, Kid, you won't believe this. The video has passed 300,000 views. 30 minutes, Diana. 30 minutes. Diana stopped, mid-step. That fast, Marcus shook his head. Not just fast, loud, very loud. He handed her the phone. Notifications poured down the screen like a waterfall. CEO of SkyVista Airlines stays calm during racist attack. Passenger goes viral after confronting black CEO on a plane. This is the leadership we need. And thousands of comments were exploding under the video. Diana stared for a moment, then breathed out slowly. I don't want the world turning against Patricia, even if she was wrong. Marcus looked at her with the kind of warmth that only comes from someone who's known you through every season, but his voice carried a firm layer of truth. Diana, when you stay true to your values, you aren't responsible for how the world reacts. You're only responsible for how you behave. She didn't answer. The words were right, but they still felt heavy in her chest like a stone sinking deeper and deeper. They got into a yellow taxi waiting nearby. Inside, the cool AC wrapped around them, completely opposite the burning heat outside. The driver, a kind-faced man with warm brown skin, peeked at Diana through the rearview mirror. You're the lady from the video, aren't you? Diana blinked. You've seen it already, he chuckled. Seen it, my whole family's watching it. My wife told me that if I ever met you, I better say thank you. Diana smiled slightly, embarrassed, slightly overwhelmed. I just did what I felt was right. The driver shook his head. No, you did more than that. You showed kids like my daughter that a black woman doesn't just get to sit anywhere on a plane. She can own the airline if she wants. Her throat tightened. She turned to the window, watching Dallas skyscrapers blur behind dust and heat. She never imagined her quiet decision to stay calm would become a symbol for someone else. But she also knew that compliment carried a long, painful, historical echo. Her phone buzzed. Messages from executives, from partners, from news outlets. "We stand with you. Emergency meeting. The video is blowing up. NBC requests an interview tonight. Legal team suggests evaluating grounds for a lawsuit." She exhaled. Marcus nodded. "Brace yourself. These are the aftershocks." Diana leaned back. "I'm tired, Marcus. Really tired." He looked at her with quiet understanding. "What exhausts you isn't the video. It's the memories it drags back with it. Every time you were overlooked, doubted, brushed aside because of your skin." She shut her eyes. He was right. Every word. By the time they reached her hotel, the press had already arrived. Dozens of reporters packed the entrance, microphones raised, camera flashes strobing the sidewalk. Marcus sighed. "You want to slip through the back?" Diana paused, then shook her head. "No. If I hide, the message gets twisted." Marcus smiled. "There she is, the Diana I know." They stepped out. A wall of flashes burst to life. "Miss Carter, how do you feel about being racially targeted on your own airline? Are you planning to sue the passenger? Do you think you were too calm? Are you worried about the company's reputation?" Diana slowly raised her hand, not commanding silence, but gently asking for it. Then she spoke, her voice steady, each word carefully placed, like stepping stones across water. "I don't want anyone's life destroyed over one mistake, but I do believe the truth needs to be acknowledged. No one deserves to be insulted because of their skin color. No one deserves to be suspected because they look different, and no one has the right to decide someone else's worth." The crowd went silent. Diana continued, "I don't want this to become a fight between two people. I want it to serve as a reminder to society. Respect isn't a privilege. Respect is the standard." A reporter asked softly, "Are you angry?" Diana lifted her gaze toward the sky, blue, wide, familiar, almost like the skies of her Houston childhood. "Yes, but anger doesn't make me better. I choose calm because I refuse to become the kind of person who hurt me today. Both lines, respect is the standard, and I choose calm." Spread online, instantly turning into viral quotes. When Diana entered the hotel, Marcus whispered, "You just did more than any CEO is expected to do." She sighed. "I just want to live my life as a human being." Marcus nodded. "And that's exactly why you're succeeding." Inside a private conference room, SkyVista's executive team was waiting. The VP of Communications opened her laptop. "Diana, the video has passed 2 million views." Another reported, "We need an official response within 2 hours. Every major network wants a statement. Another, civil rights organizations want to meet with you." And another, the aviation board says this case could become a standard for the industry. Diana folded her hands. She wasn't afraid, but she could see the long, steep road forming in front of her. "We'll do the right thing," she said. Someone asked, "Define right." Diana looked each person in the eye. "The truth, our values, and the belief that everyone deserves dignity no matter who they are." The room fell silent, not out of fear, but because her clarity sank deep into every soul present. Only people who have truly endured injustice speak with that kind of steadiness. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. When everyone filed out, only Marcus remained. He placed a fatherly hand on her shoulder. "Diana, do you know what the most meaningful part of today was?" She shook her head. "It wasn't the video. It wasn't the moment you were mistreated. It wasn't even the moment your identity was revealed." He smiled gently. "It was the moment you chose not to let anger lead you. A true leader isn't measured when they're praised, but when they're tested." Diana exhaled a long, weary breath. "Marcus, I don't want to be a symbol. I just want my life." He chuckled softly. "Sometimes you don't get to choose that. Sometimes life chooses you." When Marcus left, Diana stood alone by the window. Dallas glowed like a field of stars below. Inside, her emotions tightened. Exhaustion, resolve, and a deep, aching sadness, the kind carried by someone who knows the fight for fairness never really ends. She whispered to herself, today was only the beginning. Wasn't it? In the glass reflection, her face looked back strong but unmistakably human. The face of someone who has learned to stand steady in storms yet still hopes quietly that someday the storm might ease. Night fell over Dallas with a kind of heaviness. Not the peaceful kind of night, but that in-between kind where light and darkness blur into something hazy that makes people think more than they really want to. In the hotel room, Diana Carter sat alone at a long wooden desk. The glow from her laptop screen lit up her face, calm on the surface, but her eyes were deep like dark water that hadn't settled yet. Emails were coming in by the hundreds. Messages, interview requests, apologies, support threats, encouragement from black women all across America. But one email made her stop and read it twice. My daughter is 12. She's black. And she just asked me, Mom, can I be a CEO like her? Thank you for not breaking. Diana placed a hand over her chest. A feeling both warm and painful spread through her like a quiet wave. She had stayed on her feet, but she never imagined that her standing would make someone else rise. A soft knock came at the door. 4 even taps, then 3 shorter ones, Marcus Hale's familiar signal. Diana opened the door. Marcus walked in holding 2 cups of hot tea. You need this, he said, setting one down in front of her. Diana gave him a grateful smile. I forgot I haven't drunk anything since we landed. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Your mind's been running too fast to remember something that basic. For a while, neither of them said anything. The room felt strangely peaceful, as if they'd stepped outside the storm still raging beyond those hotel walls. Then Diana finally spoke. Marcus, I'm scared. He didn't ask of what. He just laced his fingers together and waited, letting her find the words she needed to say. Diana exhaled slowly. I'm scared people will think I'm using this to build my image. Marcus shook his head. You can't control what people think, but you can control your intention. Diana leaned back in her chair, staring up at the ceiling. So what is my intention? Instead of answering, he asked, What do you want to see change? After today? Diana looked back at him. Her eyes shifted from unfocused and tired to sharp the way a plane finds its runway through clouds. I want to turn pain into action. Marcus smiled. That's the Diana Carter the world needs. Her phone buzzed again, this time a video call from Ava Lane, the lead flight attendant. Diana hesitated for a second, then picked up. Ava's face appeared on screen, hair tied back, neatly still in uniform, even though the flight had ended hours ago. Miss Carter, Diana cut in gently. Ava, please. Call me Diana. Ava shook her head, eyes red from exhaustion and emotion. No. Tonight, I want to call you by the title you just protected with your kindness. Diana said nothing. Not because she was uncomfortable, but because she knew Ava was speaking from the deepest, most honest part of herself. Ava continued. I wanted you to know, after you got off the plane, a lot of passengers came to find me. They said your calmness made them think about how they treat other people. They said they want to raise their kids to be kinder. Diana froze for a moment. A warm shiver ran down her spine. Ava's voice trembled slightly. Today you weren't just a CEO. You were a reminder. Silence hung between them for a long moment. Then Ava added quietly, and I want you to know, I'm proud to work for you. Diana blinked away the sting at the corners of her eyes, then ended the call gently like setting down a feather. Marcus watched her, a knowing smile in his eyes. See, kindness is never wasted. At that moment, the hotel window flickered with bursts of light from across the street. Marcus walked over to pull the curtains aside. Diana heard him sigh. The storm's here. She joined him at the window. Down on the street, reporters' cameras, satellite vans. Not loud, not chaotic, but clearly waiting. Waiting for her response. Waiting to see what she'd do next. Waiting to see whether the black woman humiliated on an airplane would become a symbol or disappear into silence. Diana closed the curtains. I can't let this just be a story about pain, she said. Marcus nodded. Exactly. It has to become a story about change. She sat back down at the desk and opened a fresh document. A blank page. Marcus asked, What are you going to do? Diana stared at the empty screen, her voice soft but steady like the moment. Airplane wheels first kiss the runway. I'm going to build a new training program for SkyVista. Something about empathy and awareness. Not to punish anyone, but to prevent days like today from happening again. Marcus leaned back, pride shining in his eyes. That's how a real leader answers hate with action, not retaliation. Diana typed the first words, understanding. Before judgment. She read it once, then nodded. And not just SkyVista, she added. I'll share it with the whole industry. Whether they use it or not, that's up to them. But I want to leave something behind. Marcus chuckled. You say you don't want to be a symbol. Then you go do something. Only symbols do. Diana laughed for the first time since stepping off that plane. A real laugh. Her phone pinged again. A message from James Porter, the young flight attendant, Miss Carter. I know I'm just a junior crew member, but if you ever need someone to speak up about what really happened, I'll do it. Diana smiled and typed back, Thank you, James. But what matters most isn't speaking about the past. It's helping each other build a better future. She hit send, and for the first time that day, something inside her felt a little lighter. Marcus stood. You need to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long. But Diana kept her eyes on the screen, not out of pressure, out of purpose. Marcus, she said quietly, I'm not tired anymore. He frowned, half confused. Why not? She closed her eyes for a second. Her heart felt clearer than the sky after a storm. Because I just realized I'm not only living my own life anymore. I'm living for the little girls who look like I did, who need to see that they're not less than anyone just because of their skin. Marcus nodded slowly. Then you found your reason to keep going. Diana turned toward the window. Dallas lights still flickered outside, beautiful but powerless to hide reality. She spoke softly. Today, Patricia hurt me. But if I let it stop at the pain, I'll be wasting the chance to help someone else heal. Silence settled over the room. Not a heavy silence, a beautiful one. Then Diana said the words the media would quote 100 times later, pain only has meaning. If we turn it into a flame that lights the way. Marcus smiled. Because he knew from that exact moment on, Diana wasn't just the CEO of an airline anymore. She had become something else. A guide, a torchbearer, someone willing to turn her wounds into light. The next morning in Dallas, the sky stretched pale and gentle, the kind of blue that makes people take a deeper, easier breath. A new day. But for Diana Carter, it wasn't just the next day. It was the final chapter of one ordeal and the opening of something far greater. She stood before the hotel window, sunlight spilling across her calm face. The weight in her chest from last night was gone. Not because everything had ended, but because she had found the place to set her pain down. Marcus stepped in, holding a steaming cup of coffee. You didn't sleep much, did you? His voice carried understanding without judgment. Diana smiled. No sleep, but I feel strangely alert. Marcus looked down at the city, beginning to stir below them. You know what you're going to do, right? Diana nodded, her voice soft but strong. Today I will speak to the world, not about how I was offended, but about how we can all be better to each other. He studied her for a long moment, pride hidden behind steady eyes. So today, Diana, you officially step into the role destiny has called you to. As they descended to the hotel lobby, reporters were lined up in 2 rows. Cameras flashed endlessly, strobes slicing the air like rapid heartbeats. A female reporter stepped forward. Miss Carter. Do you have a statement about yesterday's incident? Others pushed in. Will you be pressing charges against Patricia Hayes? Are you worried about your image? Everyone is waiting for your response. Diana didn't rush. She signaled Marcus to pause, inhaled deeply like a pilot returning to the cockpit after a storm. She stepped onto the small platform the hotel had set up temporarily, and she was silent. The silence stretched long enough for the crowd to lower their voices. The cameras still clicked, but out of respect, not curiosity. Then she spoke soft, clear, steady, like a tree rooted in a vast field. Yesterday, I experienced a moment that many of us may have faced. A moment of judgment, before a word could even escape. A murmur ran through the crowd, then quieted. I do not share this to make anyone feel guilty. I share it because I believe we can do better for each other. Her words, carefully laid, built an invisible bridge from her heart to every listening heart in the crowd. Diana continued. There are wounds born from bias, wounds born from fear, and there are wounds born from the loneliness of being told you don't belong. A middle-aged male reporter lowered his hands from his camera as if her words struck something he'd long kept hidden. Diana paused. Her gaze was not sad, not angry, but lit with understanding. Yesterday I was seen as a fraud simply because of the color of my skin. But that moment reminded me that I was once the little girl standing outside the world's door, wondering, am I good enough to step inside? A soft breeze ruffled her hair, marking the rhythm of silence in her story. Then the next line rose, flowing smoothly into the crowd. Today I am not here to retaliate. I am here to say, we must learn to see each other with empathy before we judge. A young female reporter's eyes welled up. She actually cried. Diana went on, her heart expanding with each word. I do not want Patricia to lose everything. I only want all of us to learn from that mistake. A single statement rendered all microphones still. When someone is led by prejudice, they may harm others. But when someone is led by fear, they are only hurting themselves. She clasped her hands lightly, gathering the pain into a warm flame. And I believe in the power of change. I believe in second chances. I believe that we can learn from mistakes without destroying each other. Marcus stood behind her, nodding slightly, affirming that she was walking her own path correctly. Diana then announced what she had drafted in the middle of the night. Today, SkyVista will launch a new program, People First, Color Second, a training program on understanding and awareness. The crowd went silent for a brief heartbeat. I want every member of our airline, pilots, flight attendants, ground staff, and executives alike to have the opportunity to see deeper, listen better, and empathize more fully. A reporter asked, "Do you think this will make a difference?" Diana answered without blinking. "It will change how we take off, and how we treat each other in the skies and on the ground." Her words spread through the crowd like sunlight piercing through clouds. "And I hope this program doesn't stop at SkyVista. If any other airline wants to adopt it, I will share it freely." The crowd murmured not in scandal, but in awe of the magnitude of human intent. As she stepped down from the platform, a black girl of about 10 ran forward and hugged her even before the security could intervene. "Miss Diana, I want to grow up like you." Diana knelt down, looking into the child's bright, shining eyes. "No, sweet one. Grow up to be the best version of yourself." The little girl nodded firmly and ran back to her mother, who was wiping away tears. Marcus stepped forward. "That's why you had to stand before the world today." Diana smiled, tired, but beautiful in the way of someone who has found truth amid the storm. That afternoon, as their car headed back to the airport, Marcus asked, "Do you feel lighter now?" Diana gazed at the open runway. Not just lighter, but hopeful. "Hopeful for what?" She replied with a voice firm enough to carve the air. "Hope that the world can change from small moments. Like yesterday. Like today. Like every moment when someone chooses to treat others with kindness." Marcus was silent for a moment, then said, "Your flight has never just been in the sky. It has always been in the hearts of people." Diana looked at him, eyes warm as if seeing another father. "And I will keep flying. Not to escape pain, but to carry hope." By the end of the day, before boarding the flight back to Seattle, Diana recorded a short video for her audience. "Today, I want to remind you, if someone has ever judged you for who you are, for the color of your skin, or for where you come from, remember this: your worth is not in the eyes of others. It is in how you rise, after they try to pull you down." She smiled, gentle, deep. "If my story touches you, share it to remind someone that we all have the right to be respected, and we all have the power to make a difference." A pause. Then she added her final line. "Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you want to hear more stories of healing, like, share, and subscribe. See you on Skies That Know Love." The cameras went dark, and the next journey began.